Okay, this morning I'm pleased to be joined by Kyle Snyder. Kyle, before we get started, I was actually shooting some B roll out, RAF 8. There was a family there whose father was a warhawk, spoke very, very passionately about you. His whole family made the trip up and was incredibly proud to come out to support you. How's it feel to know that people take their whole family out just to see that with you and has a personal connection to you in that way as well?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up wrestling at the Warhawks, and it's one of the best clubs in Maryland. So I knew the family, and they're a great family, and kids work hard. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely cool that they came out to watch, and I'm very thankful. And at RAF 9, there's some families down there in Dallas that have reached out saying they're coming. So it's always fun to see faces that people in the crowd.
Well, I'm from Maryland myself, so it was always nice to be somewhere and find another fellow Marylander. And just on the topic of RAF '08, anybody that watched, anybody that was in that building knows how electric the atmosphere was. You kind of fall behind early, you rally late, kind of shift the momentum completely. I know this is a cliche question, but you've wrestled all over the world's best athletes. When you hear that level of patriotism and you know it seems like the whole building was behind you. Can you try to explain to someone that's never going to feel that moment in their life what that's like?
Yeah, it is hard to explain. Definitely, a lot of energy like in the crowd, and it gives me, more motivation, more, it's like my conditioning. It doesn't matter how tired I am, it doesn't matter how my body feels like gives you that extra push to continue to wrestle hard. And so I'm not doing a great job of describing what it's like, but I feel like we were all kind of in it together, honestly. So if you were there, then you did experience it. You might not have been the person on the mat, but everybody, everybody was working together. So it was a crazy environment.
To be fair, I don't know there is a proper way that you can describe it. It really was one of those moments where it felt like everyone in the building was against your opponent, including you. Uh, So I would almost love to know also, like, what's the other side of that feel like? What does it feel like when the entire building is hoping that you lose as you slowly can't get off the mat from exhaustion? It would probably be a great question to ask as well. But to that point, a lot of fans from MMA are crossing over. There's a lot of name value associated with these cards. For a lot of those fans, this may be the first time they've seen someone like you, an elite level wrestler, an athlete like yourself. Can you kind of explain briefly the technical differences between maybe a guy like Colby Covington using that wrestling inside the UFC versus somebody like yourself that's using a high level competitive form of wrestling?
Well, Colby was a two-time All-American, so he's a pretty, elite level wrestler himself. And a lot of the UFC guys I've seen, are pretty good wrestlers. Like Armin's obviously very good. Henry Cejudo's an Olympic champ. I'd be really interested to see Marab wrestle in Dallas, and because his conditioning is so good. But I'll be interested to see his wrestling technique. I think that there's differences. Like, I'm not worried about getting choked out or getting my arm put in a weird position, and like we wear shoes, so that makes it easier to finish and more difficult to kick out for the defensive guy. Like in the UFC, MMA, like you have to protect your neck at all times. And there's not a lot of like penetrating and hitting your knee when it comes to the MMA wrestling, just because you're like setting yourself up to get kneed or different things like that. So it's a lot more like fake fake a punch or something and then attack, lower your level and attack, but stay on your feet. Um so but from what I've seen so far, I mean, I think the UFC guys are tough, and definitely bring a lot of viewership to RAF and wrestling. So I love it.
Well, I'm sure you're aware there's a pretty big fight this weekend as we record this. You've actually mentioned some interest in wrestling, Khamzat Chimaev. How do you approach a matchup like that? Are you and your coaches studying both his wrestling through MMA? You know, we talked a little bit about those differences. Are you going over those tendencies beforehand, or is this something you feel like mainly you can kind of adjust to instinctively during a match?
I haven't even thought about actually preparing for him. Like they're gonna have to, RAF would have to make the match happen, and then I would start to think about actually wrestling him. But I don't think it's gonna be a thing where we would wrestle right away or anytime soon. I think he would wrestle some other MMA guys first, and then depending on how he feels, maybe. But um, I think it would be a little while before that happens.
Let me ask you this: if you've got maybe someone in the UFC that's not known as a wrestler, maybe they're much more of a striker, but they watch RAF, and you mentioned Armin in a degree to this, and thinks to themselves, I think I can go do that too. Realistically, how long do you think it would take someone with an MMA base as an athlete to be able to prepare? If you yourself maybe had that task of training someone, how long do you think it would realistically take them to just be able to legitimately compete at that level?
Like against another MMA guy or against a wrestler.
Against a more defined, Olympian wrestler.
I think it would take at least a year. Yeah,
And
I would
you
say at least a year to be, you know, like they know what they're doing and they have the conditioning for wrestling and um, all of those things. They were training it every day. I think it would take at least a year, but they're good athletes, and I mean they know they have the fighter's mentality and the competitor's mind, so that part is good. But yeah, just the technique and conditioning is different.
I know there's some recency bias built into this question because we're not even 10 events in. Obviously, you didn't grow up aspiring to become the RAF champion, but you've already won that now, NCAA, World Olympic levels. We've talked a lot about the caliber just of athlete that's coming into RAF. Where does you being the RAF champion right now rank for you? Are you still introducing yourself as Olympic gold medalist Kyle Snyder, or does RAF champion kind of become part of that identity now too?
I don't really introduce myself as any of that, honestly, but uh, I think um, we'll see. Like you said, we're only this RAF '09 is in Dallas, so I think that to the spectator, it's becoming more and more important every event. Um, Growing up, like you said, it was being NCAA champion, world champion, Olympic champion, and I think the Olympics, is kind of like that's like the highest level of competition for many sports. So I think for me, it's really the level of competition. Like I feel that the RAF belt at the 215-pound weight class is a big time achievement because I've had to beat Tazadinov, Olympic champ, uh, Razambek, Abukhan, world champion, and now I'm wrestling Givi, Matcharashvili, Olympic silver medalist, and Abdul Rashid Saljalayev is in the weight class, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. So to be the champ at the 250-pound, 15-pound weight class at RAF, I think is a serious deal.
You mentioned a lot about Olympic team, the Olympic level. Traditionally, you're only going to have one athlete get that spot, which means, thousands of talented wrestlers never even reach that level. You've already started to see kind of, younger wrestlers look into RAF and see this as a goal, maybe not just as a dream, but a legitimate way to maybe build a future, a living out of wrestling that you might not always seen. When you go out and you talk to children and kids, young high school, college, do you see them already kind of looking at this and saying, okay, I've got another outlet, another, way I can pursue the sport that I love?
100%. Yeah, I mean, honestly, people are always like, let's wrestle in RAF. why don't we wrestle in RAF? You know, like people are always asking me about that, and then they want to be on the cards. So I know Chad and Izzy say they get messages constantly asking for the opportunity to wrestle on the platform. So I think it's going to become more and more competitive. And yeah, I think it's a great thing for people being able to stay in the sport as competitors longer.
One thing RAF has done exceptionally well, I talked to Chael about this, just about everyone I've interviewed, I've talked to about this, is the seminars, the fan interaction. We're obviously in a very digital media age. Kids can watch the NFL, they can watch NBA, but they're not going to have direct access to, top athletes in those sports. In wrestling, and to be fair, and MMA, there are pipelines that exist where you can go train with someone that has this lineage. We mentioned beginning of the interview with the Warhawks. What do you think it means to a kid to be able to go out and see that person that they watch compete, and also know, hey, I've got a way to maybe go see this guy and learn from this guy firsthand?
I think it's amazing what RAF has done, you know, the entire weekend. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Masters golf tournament, you know, like you got the family round before the tournament starts, and the whole thing's just like, you know, really spectator friendly, and you get to get a look into the athletes' lives in a different way. So, like REF, you know, they just announced they're doing the next generation series where they're having 10U, 12U, 15U, 18U wrestlers competing in events in the same city that they're having, you know, the RAF Premier card. And then we have the Fan Fest before the match where we're signing autographs, taking pictures for 3 hours, 4 hours, you know, the day of competition. Like, what other organization is doing that? And then we're competing that night. And then the following night, you know, there's a clinic for kids to attend. So, like in Dallas, you know, I'm going to be teaching the clinic with Jason Nolf and Johnny DeJulius. So, um, where else can you get that type of access into? I mean, in Philadelphia, I walked out with a fan. You know what I mean? Like one of the kids literally walked out with me to the mat. He's in the back with me watching me warm up. Like how much more personal, and that experience, like I remember as a kid, my older brother played basketball, so like his team got to go to a Wizards game, and it was when Michael Jordan was playing on the Wizards, and like we got to give him a high five before he went out to the court, and like that was literally the coolest thing me and my older brother had ever experienced in our life. So like this is way more than that. So yeah, it's really impressive, and I think that's what we have to do if we're going to make this work.
Yeah, and you are. I mean, I actually saw you out before the event. The synergy of these events, unless you've went to them, I've covered a lot of MMA. I've been to a lot of MMA. It's a different atmosphere. It's first of all, it's a much more family oriented atmosphere. But as you said, the ability that fans almost really take this personal is different. In a few weeks, you've got an event coming up. Obviously, you're going to face a 2024 Olympic silver medalist, actually a bronze medalist at the World Wrestling Championship 2019, very decorated wrestler. Can you just talk about how you feel like this match is going to go and how things like this are going to pan out?
I mean, we'll see how the match goes. I mean, I know I'm going to wrestle as hard as I can, and I'm going to wrestle in a way that makes him never want to wrestle me again. And that's my goal every time I compete. And Givi he's really a dangerous wrestler because he's really good defensively, chest locks. He has good leg attacks, and he's really tough on top. Obviously, the credentials makes him one of the best 215-pound wrestlers in the entire world. So, I mean, in a match like this, it's it's uh it's going to take everything I have to be able to compete with a guy like that.
All right. Well, we will definitely see. I will absolutely, as a Maryland resident myself, I will be cheering for you. Anybody that wants to watch it can either go to the event on the website, you can buy tickets, or obviously watch through Fox Nation.
Yep. Thank you guys. God bless.